Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for What We Need to Explore, Self-Care Behaviors and What They Tell Us, and then creating and modeling balance in our work. Now I'd like to introduce a speaker. Sebecca Brodier is a licensed master social worker and a licensed clinical social worker who now works with the New Mexico Public Education Department in the Special Education Division.
Good morning, everyone. Good deal. So today we're going to talk about some of the things we need to explore and just make sure that we talk about self-care, and then we're going to talk about behaviors and what they sometimes are telling us, and then creating and modeling balance in our work. So those are kind of the topics for today. Thank you for coming in and joining us today. I know everybody's virtual and this is kind of a different way to do a conference. So thank you guys very much for attending. One of the things we're going to talk about is a lot of the basic needs for teachers and students are the same. So we want to keep in mind what we normally need as individuals is not that different virtually or if we're in the classroom. So one of the things we talk about is I put thirst, meaning our basic needs of snack and water and so forth. The kids are not going to be going to water fountains and different things at most schools. So teachers are planning for what that looks like in the classroom, that they have their own water bottles, they're kind of assigned to them. And then also you as a presenter, what do you need to have by you? Do you need to have a snack if you're presenting for a while and you need to have water? You've got to think about those basic needs. One thing about going back into a classroom after this COVID time that we've had is we've talked to several kids and we've also students and we've talked to several teachers. And one of the things they've talked about is getting that basic feeling of safety of when am I going to eat? How am I going to have, am I going to drink? What is the routine going to look like? So that's not any different than you normally do when you come back to school, is setting up your classroom rules. You have the same perspective that you do in that. When you look at your basic teacher and student needs, you're going to be really looking at your environment. So today, one of the things that I needed was to make sure, how am I prepared for today? What do I need to be prepared for today? So that was having water for me next to me. That was having Leah that's going to be reading the chat, so I don't have to read the chat and do this part. It was also what are the materials I need around me to be able to go through the presentation, just what makes me feel comfortable presenting. And it's the same thing for you as a teacher. What makes you feel comfortable in running your classroom online or in the classroom, physical classroom setting. Knowing how to use the format that you're using. Do you know how to screen share or switch screens if you need to? Today, one of the things I needed was also to have Veronica, which is the tech person for us. She's so good, keeps us going when we're recording, when we're not. It just gives me a sense of parameters of what I need and what's around me. And that's one of the things that we all need, whether we're teaching online or whether you're going back in the classroom. I know that districts are pretty much not going back until after Labor Day is kind of the consensus with most districts, and so with governor's orders. And so people are like, how do I switch? How do I create this? So you're really setting up the environment for the students and for yourself. We're teaching this way. We're going to be doing this for 90 minutes or for an hour. You do your same classroom management that you would do in the classroom. What makes you feel comfortable as a teacher and as presenting in front of your students? It's just like getting your things on the walls that make you feel comfortable, that are going to teach your teach your lesson plans, all of those kind of things. So what do you need in the virtual environment? Do you have positive reinforcers, which we'll talk a little more later? Anything that you do in the classroom, it's amazing that you can do it tech-wise now. So I know in this environment, for example, for my son, he's a really big needs reinforcements. So that teacher in the environment had stickers and had different things available for him to be able to choose online and the other students. So again, it's just setting up your environment. You know your students best that are coming back from the information you had from when they were leaving the school and going virtual. You get that information. If you have students on IEPs, individual education plans, you're going to be looking at what does that mean? What did they need in the classroom to be able to look at that and help with the environment? If you look at my slides are pretty bright colored, right? On the side, pretty bright lime green. The black font, that's one of the things I look at if I have kids with visual needs, for example. It's not too busy for some of the kids that can't do clutter. So you really keep it simple with what your particular students need. So just thinking about the environment in which you're working, and then what do you feel comfortable with? I really feel comfortable with just kind of keywords telling me what I need to talk about. Some people feel like they need more writing when they're doing lesson plans. So you may need that as well. So really thinking about that. When you're in the classroom, one of the things that's going to be important when you return to the classroom is, what is the heat, air? What does that feel like to you? The temperature of the room, all of those kind of things that you normally think about when you start school, it's going to be exactly the same. One of the things we talk about is body movement as well. We all move and we all need to move. That doesn't change online. To have students sit and be in a very thing is very, very difficult. I'm going to show you these cards I have. It's called Otis the monkey, and it's from an OT that works elementary through middle school. And one of the things that we do in between breaks and things, if you can look at my picture in the corner where I'm at, you can see Otis, the OT monkey. And when you look at it, it gives you things to do for kids sitting in their desk or sitting at a computer. So like flipping the hands is one picture. If they're sitting at a desk, another movement is crossing their hands, getting movement of some sort. Usually when you're doing body movement on virtual, you're going to need some kind of visual. So if they're standing up, here's a visual that you're doing this, or you're putting your hands out, all of those kind of things. It may be that you have students that have fidgets in your classroom, or you as a presenter may need a fidget. Remember what you need in body movement as well when you're presenting. So sometimes I'm tapping my fingers on my desk or so forth, and I may have that. But remember to build movement to your environment, what you feel comfortable with as a teacher. You want to make sure if you're doing PE, if you're doing health, if you're a social worker, whatever you're doing, whatever your role is in the school, make sure that you have movement as a part of that. We've had some teachers they're singing at the beginning of their classes, they're moving around, they're getting that, and that's fine. Whatever works for you guys, do perfectly well. So that's one of the things. This is a really good point. If you get feedback, or if you have a lot of conversations, or somebody's answering their phone, this is one of the other things you as a teacher want to be in control of your environment, what you're comfortable with. You can mute everybody. The other thing is, you see the pictures on the side, you can have one picture going instead of the whole group if you need to. Whatever it is that you need to be able to participate and have, be able to do that. It's absolutely okay. And then just tell your participants that you're going to mute, and that when they can talk and when they can have that background. Knowing your biases and what your irritations are really important. You guys know this, that are experts in the classroom. You have to set up your classroom for this as well. What are your biases online? What are those pet peeves that really bother you when you're teaching online? And kind of figure out how to do classroom management for those as well. If you want students to go around and be able to teach them and have that, do like round robin of things, then you can do that as well. You can put them in different classrooms, meaning put them in groups. So just knowing what your format is and knowing how you want to do that. The other thing is social time, a connection. One of the things that teachers have talked about is that connection, teaching face-to-face. So it may help to have people on the side that you can look at and talk to and see their interaction and their movements. The other thing is creating a social time where the students may be able to talk to each other, as long as it's facilitated and you have what the group wants to talk. You can still do small group, even online. And I know we learned a lot about this in the last 4 months that we were doing virtual. The other thing is having expression. What is and what is not working? You've really got to have constant feedback. So if you run a class or you run maybe videos in your group or so forth, you want to hear what worked well and what not, so you can adjust it for the next session and make sure that that works for them. A lot of teachers use some YouTube videos. Some kids loved it to do science experiments with and so forth. Some physical activity was done through YouTubes. You just have to make sure that your students know how to do it and know that it's working well for them or not. And if it's not working well, how do you adjust it for them? How do you help with that? So these are some of the things in self-care that teachers and students have said that they need as well. We're in an era of creating a new norm for a very unpredictable time of COVID-19. So what is the same and what is different? And just acknowledging that in your classroom management, talking about what works and how you're kind of have to learn something or maneuver. Because just like your parents and your students are learning this, they understand that you are too. So there's that forgiveness within this as well, and being patient with yourself and realizing that this new norm, even though it's predictable, can become somewhat of a norm. We had teachers that were creating normacy saying, this is what we're going to be doing this week. So I just kind of want to iron it out for you guys. And this is what we're going to be doing online. And this is how it's going to be. And they created a normacy for the kids, even if they said next week on Monday, we'll talk about what the changes are going to be for next week. So as they were making these changes and doing it, they created a norm for those kids. And the norm was that there was going to be flexibility and change, which is not always easy to do, but it's a really good classroom management style. What do you need? Students, teachers, and families, they've really talked about, again, that they need a lot of the same things. They need that prep time to know how they're supposed to participate. Families' feedback were some of them loved virtual because they had the interaction directly with the teacher. Some of them had reported that they had the most conversations with their teacher they've ever had before. So there was some really positive feedback in that. They felt more of a connection with their teacher because they were on some of the lessons with their students at home. But they said they needed prep time. They needed to know how to help their student. So they needed to know what their role with their student was at home as well, just like you need to know your role in teaching it. Communication needed to be clear and flexible, meaning that we know in COVID time, the events and conversations are going to change, and that communication happened often. I know a lot of teachers reported us that they had office hours, plus they were online daily. And there was really good feedback about the communication piece. So that's really important. Patience, that you have patience with students, that assignments may take longer. It may take you longer to teach a particular lesson as well. So be patient with yourself. It may not move as quickly because you don't have, 10 minutes, this group working on this while you're helping this group over here. It may look very different. So give yourself grace of the patience in that as well, because we know the curriculum is set. You have your math, you have your reading and so forth. So the patience is coming around how you deliver that during COVID time. Understanding the format that's being used, really understanding the functionality is important. If you're a person that loves to put YouTube videos up while you're talking and have visual, make sure that those are running the way that you want simultaneously. Also, being able to understand the functionality if you need to mute everybody. Some of you teach special education, so sometimes you're going to have medical fragile students as well. You may have different noises. Some teachers reported suction machines, different sounds and different things going off while they were teaching. So just kind of being prepared that may be in your format as well in your particular classroom, and just kind of preparing for that. One of the things that we know is that families need to have a voice, and the students and staff are the same way, meaning their voice is given by their participation, their opinions, and ongoing feedback. One of the things we know when you're doing online in particular, just like when you're in the classroom, is people want to know that their opinion matters, that they're part of the process. So whether it's online or whether it's in classroom, you build that into your classroom management of how do I get their opinions and feedback? How do I get their buy-in? And that's how you do it, is making sure that they're participating and that they understand how to participate. Now, we know that may be different for some kids or some students, because maybe you've got a kiddo that it takes them a little longer to do a lesson than another kiddo. So give them that time, figure out how that's going to work. And then you can be able to give them a voice and have that. Give the answers that are possible, meaning the ones that you know, be honest about it. Because there are things we don't know, right, during COVID time. So be honest about what you don't know as well. Don't feel like you have to have all the answers. The parents don't have all the answers, and neither do the students. So nobody expects you to either. This is kind of something that we're working and growing as week goes by and you're teaching in the classroom. But if there are the scientific answers that you have, if there is areas that we need to have our own water bottles, particularly about COVID, or we're going to wash our hands during this time, or those kind of things, those are all factual. You all know those. So those are the answers you can give. The answers creating your expertise in your teaching style that you can still give. So one of the things I want you to take away and to remember in this is that you're still the teacher. You're still running the classroom, whether it's virtual or whether it's you're doing PE or whether you're a counselor or social work, you still have your same skills, your same abilities. You're just expanding the format in which you're teaching it. So give yourself credit where credit is due. Don't feel like if you're learning something, there's any part that you just can't do, because your experience is still there. Your families are still looking to you as the teacher or as the PE coach or as the counselor or the social worker, all the different roles we have in the schools. So that doesn't change with this. So just be assured that since you still have those skills, it's just a different way of presenting them. One of the things I just want you to really take away with self-care, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about it, is really taking time for you and give yourself patience and guidance. Just like us giving presentations all summer and we started in the fall, we had to switch to how we're doing it as well. And so people had to be patient with me if somebody was talking in the background or if there was a plane going over and we didn't know how to do settings and all of that, but we still got it done. We still have the information out there, so don't forget that. One of the things we want to talk about in behavior is, the first thing is just acknowledge we're going to have behaviors. We have gone into a time that is totally different than any of us have ever experienced. So there's going to be behaviors just because of that. Then there's going to be behaviors because of what they're trying to communicate. Okay. We know that behaviors impact the environment, obviously, whatever that is, whether we do virtual or in class, your peers, your teaching staff, students having the behavior it affects, parents that are there. Parents have talked about when their child started acting out or happening virtually, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to close the camera, or they were embarrassed for their student or so forth. So those are the kind of things that you want to help your parents through. If there are major behaviors, or if you have certain students that have certain conditions that will have a behavior with it, that you just help them do boundaries and parameters around it, how they feel comfortable online when that starts to show. Educational assistants or EAs, it affects the community partners. Transportation when you go back to school, behaviors on the bus and so forth is a big one. And then administrators. What do we do when we're having behaviors and our teachers are reporting this? How do we help support our teaching staff as well? The whole goal is to intervene with the right supports at the right timing of the behavior so that you can help avoid escalation. That's the goal. Okay, it's not to stop the behavior, it's just to avoid as much escalation as you possibly can. Okay, some of the tools that we have is pairing or building a rapport with your students. You guys all do that fantastic when you're in the classroom. It's a little harder virtually, right? So sometimes people are having office hours, getting to know their students. One of the best suggestions that a couple of the teachers have given me is they're having meetings virtually with their students and families. So they're gonna kind of get to know them before they ever open their classroom, virtual classroom. And so they can kind of get, if they have IEPs, they're reading those and kind of going with the students. So as much information as you can have, the better that you're prepared. And then the better the student and family's prepared. Also learning what motivates the student. If you can know what motivates the student, you can guide the behaviors. And you also can guide how their learning experience is. So anything that you can kind of know. Also triggers of the student. And then observe the behavior. We have, of course, in classroom. You're going to see it in different settings. You're going to see it with different lessons when you do it virtually. So, for example, we may have some kids that start to have a behavior if the screen is too cluttered. You may start to see behaviors. Maybe a student that's having difficulty in reading will start to have behaviors when you get to that part of the lesson. So whatever it is that you start watching and you start seeing, you're going to start building that into your virtual classroom as well. So one of the things that you want to do is know the function of the behavior, okay? And you want to know if you were reinforcing the wanted or the unwanted behaviors. Reinforcement can be given in a virtual classroom as well. We talked about that if you are doing, for example, you have a child with a massive behavior virtually, right? And everybody's seeing it and so forth. Say you stop the class and you really start talking to that individual. If that individual really wanted your individual attention, for example, and you stopped the class and started giving it to them, you just reinforced the unwanted behavior that you didn't want. So you need to think about how your intervention either supports the wanted behavior or the unwanted. And that's kind of how we think about it. Taking data is always something that's important. Like, do you know this particular child does this during a certain time of lessons you're teaching? Do you know what happens right before the behavior occurs? Some of those. And guys, data scares people. And it totally, just the word sometimes scares people because people aren't used to doing the data. So think about it in really easy data. Most of you do scatter plotting or you do frequency data. So like, for example, some of our teachers in the spring, they were doing frequency data. So one of the teachers told me they had pieces of masking tape on their table that they were working from, and they were tracking a particular student's behavior. What they would do is they would move the masking tape every time the child did the behavior that was unwanted for that teacher. They just took a piece of masking tape and moved it over to the other side. And that's all she did while she was teaching her lesson. Then at the end, when she got off camera, she knew how many times that student had done it in that time frame. So she took easy data. So it doesn't have to be complicated or anything. It should be data that's helpful to you and then helpful to explain to the parent as well. Okay? So building a rapport or pairing with the student, much easier, right? When you're face-to-face or you have a student that you're asking to do things and they're building rapport because they feel good about their accomplishing tasks that you're asking them of. But one of the things we want to do is to establish yourself as the ultimate reinforcer. As the teacher, you are the giver of all good things. So if you have somebody who loves to help, maybe they're passing something out virtually. Maybe they're hitting the button for a certain screen to pop up. Building rapport, whatever it looks like, virtually or in class, you want to make sure that you're the giver of reinforcer. Building and maintaining with the rapport of the student is so important because you're going to know where to intervene. If you're pairing or if you're building rapport with that individual, you're going to know how to intervene with that particular person. That's why it's so important. Motivators. We all have motivators. Would we just come to work? I mean, I know a lot of us love our jobs, but would you come to work if you weren't getting a paycheck to support your families? If you weren't getting annual leave, or you weren't getting this, or you weren't getting all these different things that might be supporter of you working, it might not be a motivator for you. Whatever motivates you to be able to do is what's really important. Motivators increase the value of a reinforcer. So if you're reinforcing and that reinforcing is motivated for that individual, you can get that person to do a lot of work for you and a lot of things for you that you're trying to help them with their education in the education setting, whether virtual or in classroom. A reinforcer is something that increases the likelihood that that specific behavior you're wanting will occur again, which is the whole goal, right? If there's great behavior, if theres things that you want to have happen again, if you give a reinforcer and you know that that will happen, then that's fantastic. One of my children loves to draw. So the teacher said, okay, we're gonna do this virtual, set it up privately with him, and said, we're gonna do this lesson virtually. When we're done, I want you to draw this and this, the last 10 minutes, I'm gonna take you off the camera. You can draw, and then you can show it to your peers when you're done. And she did other things like that with the students. And so he worked incredibly hard during that lesson because what motivates him is being able to draw, is being able to express himself. So she took 5-10 minutes out of that reward time. First you do this, then you get that. That's something really easy to do virtually. So you take those kind of skills and then you can incorporate it into your lessons. Also knowing the triggers, whether you're virtual or in classroom. Okay, so like a trigger for me when I'm attending a conference, if the screen is just completely cluttered, like a really dark background, or you have lots and lots of words, I just can't hang with you. I start to listen to you verbally, yes, but I lose interest in the screen. So whatever it is for me, that would be a trigger for me not to pay as much attention, okay? But for other people, there's different triggers. So I have headphones, as you can see, that help me to hear more clearly when you guys are talking or when we're giving feedback than just listening to the computer speakers. So again, what are those triggers for you? What are the triggers for the students as well? One of the things that we heard students that they had a hard time with the environment was everybody talking at once, or somebody not knowing their virtual format, so they couldn't put people on mute, so they heard a lot of the background noise. Those were some of the common themes that we heard that hindered teaching the lesson fully. Again, usually triggers are caused by something in the surrounding environment. It's usually or by another person's actions. So that's usually where triggers come from. Figure out what the trigger is, we can usually find a solution. That's the great part of it. When you observe the environment, you find lighting, sounds, distractions, and you guys, this is the same for you as a presenter. Where is it good for you to present? Where is the lighting good? Where are the sounds good? What do you need to feel comfortable when you're presenting, whether it's physically in the classroom or whether you're still virtual? Does the virtual physical classroom have motivators for you as a teacher, and also something that provides a reason or stimulus to do something? So what is it that you need as feedback from your students to feel really good about the lesson you're teaching? Do they need to be turning something in so you physically can see how they're doing? What is it that you need? What is it that the students are needing as well? When you look at, does the instruction have positive reinforcement? Just meaning, is positive reinforcement, which is all it is the addition of a reward or positive response following the behavior or the wanted behavior, with the likelihood that that wanted behavior will occur again. So what are you putting in place that is giving that reinforcement? One of the things that we know for all ages is that if you put in different reinforcements between demands, you are more likely to get that demand met. So like if we're all in a staff meeting, say as adults, and somebody's just talking to us, that's one thing. We're probably not going to be as engaged as somebody who says, hey, Leah, thank you for that idea. Or, hey, thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about that. And you're actually talking to the people. Hey, Veronica, thank you for supporting me during doing this. That little breakout or those little words of identifying somebody and breaking and giving them positive feedback in some way is so crucial to the process. So that it takes seconds, but it really enforces them. If you have students online, I know something I did was like, I would see somebody drawing or something and I would say, oh, really cool pencil you brought today. And that gave them a little bit of reinforcement to engage with me. Or I would tell somebody else, ooh, that's a cool water bottle. And then I would go on with my lesson and kind of just do parts. Not that it's distracting, but things like that, just cute little tricks that will help you within seconds of doing your lesson are important. Again, observe the students in a variety of settings. When you're back in the physical classroom, one of the things that you want to look for is, what is the wanted behavior happening? What if something good is working in another breakout or in another classroom? If they're in special ed and general ed, is one of the classrooms getting the wanted behavior more than the other one? We never want to reinvent the wheel. If somebody has already gotten someone to do the wanted behavior, figure out, how did they do that? Like, what worked for that student? What worked for that teacher? If the parents virtually have some really good ideas when you talk to them and do breakouts with the parents, if they say, hey, this is really reinforcing to my student, and it meets what you can do in the educational setting, where virtual or physical, do it. You don't have to reinvent. If something works, you go with it. As long as it's good for the person, it's good for the education piece of it. Are there accommodations and modifications? I will tell you, this was a huge thing in the spring. Some people were having a hard time getting hold of the IEPs or reports for students. So that's something you got to really make sure with your district. But you really need to know if there's accommodations or modifications for that particular student, because then you can build that into your virtual time. It really sets a teacher up to fail if they don't know the information they need about that student. It makes it harder for you. And we don't want to make it harder. We want to make it, everybody's on the same page. If that student has a functional behavioral assessment or has a plan for behavior, you want to know that, because those things, strategies that people have tried and not worked, you want to not try again. Or if they have worked, you want to be able to institute that as well. So more knowledge, the better about that student. Are there clear expectations through your classroom? whether it's virtual or not. I had one teacher show me her initial page that she's coming back to school with. And just like you'd have your bulletin boards up and you'd have your different things surrounding you, she has clear expectations that pop up while she's doing her virtual. And if you want to do that and it works, then that's great. Meaning she has little messages that have her expectation that give those students that message of her expectations in her classroom. So it's the same thing that you're using your skills to set up your classroom virtually or in class. Are there transitional opportunities for students? In between lessons, reading, math, so forth, are there transitional opportunities? Can you do movement? Can you do something like this? Or can you say, we're going to put our arms out and we're going to stretch right now. We're going to take this time. Can whatever it is that will get people moving and kind of talking for a minute, can they have that in between transitions? Do people need to take water? I saw Leah drink and it reminded me I need to take a drink. So what does that look like when you're looking at virtual? And I'm talking to Leah and I'm also teaching you. That's the same thing I would do, is say, thank you, Leah, for reminding me that. And then I would come back and teach. That's a positive reinforcement right there. And you just had a small connection with Leah if she's your student, and then you come back and teach. You can do things like that that help build rapport. Are there opportunities to redirect or replace instead of saying no? I will tell you from experience as a licensed clinical social worker, saying no hardly gets you anywhere. What you're doing is, if you're redirecting and getting them to do what you've asked them to do, that's the goal. That's your instructional control. Not that you have to say, no, don't do that, get off, put yourself on mute, like do it over and over. You want to redirect the behavior and then have them do the behavior that you're requesting. If people have to process so much information, one of the easiest things to do is simplify your instructions and say what you want that person to do instead of what you don't want them to do. Because if you're starting with the don't, they have to process the don't first, then they have to process your request. If you take the don't out or the no out or the stop out and just give them what you want them to do, it cuts down that processing time where they then can turn it into action and do what you're requesting. So that's a little trick as well. When you're looking at reinforcement, and again, just the wanted or unwanted behaviors is all we're talking about, does the environment have reinforcement built in between demands? We've talked about that. Are you able to stop and talk to your kids? Are you able to talk to a parent? How do you want to handle questions with those? If a parent asks you a question, you want to give a good reinforcement to that parent as well, because you're modeling at that point what a positive reinforcement looks like to your students. So the really good thing about virtual, I will tell you, a lot of the students have said, I watched my teacher more than in the class because there weren't all the distractions. And so they were really watching what was happening. So that's one of the things. One of the tips is make sure you have clear understanding of punishment and bribery versus consequences, okay? This is a really big one. So let's talk about bribery, because honestly, guys, we all do it, especially if you have kids. We've all been there. We've all done it. So bribery might be a motivator for a student is given before the wanted target behavior stops, okay? So if the student is in the middle of a behavior and you start telling them they can have this and this and this while the behavior is happening, that's increasing the likelihood that that unwanted behavior will happen again, okay? So if a child is screaming for a toy and you say, if you stop, I'll give you that toy, the person gives the toy before the screaming stops, what have you done? You've just now reinforced the unwanted behavior, right? And here's something as a parent we've all done. Have you ever been at a grocery store and your kiddo starts crying or has a tantrum or so forth, and they really want that cookie or they really want what's on that aisle? And you go, I'm not opening that before I pay for it. I'm not doing it, I'm not doing it. They start in a major meltdown or so forth. You go, you start to open that package because everybody's staring at you. Your child is starting to scream and so forth. You open that package and you give them that cookie. That's bribery, because the likelihood that that child learned, if I scream, I get this, is being reinforced, right? But if you set it up and say, if you go through 3 aisles and you don't scream, then you can have this. That is how you want to set it up, because you set it up ahead of time and you have the expectation for the student or the child, then you're giving the reward. So the same thing in virtual. If you want a particular student to do something, set it up with them of what you want them to accomplish and then what the reward will be. And then you won't be using bribery, which then you'll be not supporting the unwanted behavior. So again, reinforcements, the teacher communicates ahead of time of what before the unwanted behavior occurs. You've already communicated what you want to have happen, and state what behaviors will and will not give you access to the wanted reinforcement. So if the student, make it very clear to them the expectations, and then make very clear to them how they obtain the reinforcement. And then, for example, if you read 2 paragraphs, you can have 10 minutes of computer time. Okay, so they know the expectation is that if they read this, they get this. But let me tell you, one of the best things about this is that if they don't do it, you are not the one taking it away from them. They did not earn it themselves. So you're not saying, I'm not giving you this and I'm punishing you, right? There's not that punishment factor in there. It's very simple. You do this, you earn this. If you don't, then I'm sorry, we'll have to try again later. And it sets you up as a professional working with the student that yes, the student can try again later. You can still use what motivates that student, but they just didn't happen to earn it this time. They didn't happen to fall through with it. So now you can say, we didn't earn it right now because the paragraphs weren't read, but we will try again in 10 minutes, or we will try again in 15. You can do the same thing virtually so that you don't set yourself up to fail. One of the things of consequences, all consequences is just a result of what happened with the behavior. It's an effect of an action. That's all it is. So be very careful with the punitive, what some people use as, oh, there's going to be a consequence if you do this. Make it as a matter of fact. This will happen if this isn't accomplished. You may not earn this if this happens. And it's just a matter of a fact of consequence. It's not punitive. It's not coming off as a punishment then. Does the environment have motivators that are motivating to the student? So I don't know if you guys ever did this, but I've done this with my kids. I thought something was so motivating for them, so I decided what motivated them. Guess what? I was so wrong. What I was choosing as a parent was not motivating to my son at all. And when I talked to him about what he wanted, then I was able to use the right motivators. So just simply talking to your students, watching them, seeing what motivates them, and being able to do it. Just be cautious about choosing several motivators that you think is what the motivator is, because a lot of times you may not be right in that. So really having those conversations and observation time with that student is really important to know that. When you look at behavior, one of the things we want to talk about are the easy that we talk about learning in kindergarten. I always say learn the ABCs. Okay, and this, I reference it down at the below that this comes from ABA techniques as well. And so one of the things you want to know, A is always the antecedent of the behavior. All that means is what happened right before the behavior occurred. So if you have a child that's starting to melt down on virtual or in class, start looking at what happened right before that behavior occurred. And that sometimes can lead you to where the intervention needs to be so that the behavior, you intervene before the behavior occurs, okay? Then B is just for the behavior. What was the behavior and what purpose did it serve? And C is the consequence. What happened immediately after the behavior? So the ABCs of it. Everything's a function of behavior. Know what the behavior is, always communication and always has a function. One of the things that's hard is to think that behavior is against us, right? I used to not be able to stand at all when kids spit on me. That was a big trigger for me when I was younger, right? It was just kind of every culture I'd ever gone to, been raised in military or so forth, that was just bad, right? But it was just a form of communication. And when I learned that, I had to figure out, what are you trying to communicate to me when you're spitting? What is happening here? And so that's one of the things that you really want to try is behavior is sometimes the voice of a student that the student has learned to use. Maybe that's the only way they've learned to communicate, and that's their function, okay? Usually there's 4 functions of behavior. These are pretty much the, there may be some other things like if kids are hungry or they're homeless or there's some external issues, but typically these are your reasons as a means to get attention or reaction. And that's not a negative thing. We all want attention. We all want that feedback. So how are they getting attention reaction? To escape or avoid an undesired activity or situation. So maybe sometimes you have a student that you get to that reading lesson and maybe they're not as strong in reading and you start to see behaviors. Maybe they're trying to avoid what's really difficult for them. That could be a part of it. But to escape avoid is a second function. To gain access to something tangible, okay? This is a big one where you'll see people reinforce the unwanted behavior, meaning that if a student wants to get to computer time or an iPad or wants to get to something and they're having a behavior right then and you give it to them, they just got the tangible item by having that outburst. So this is when you have to be careful when you intervene and how. Automatic or sensory, maybe the student's behavior just feels good. Maybe it's a need for them and you have to do replacement. So sometimes you may have a kiddo, sometimes we have kids that totally snap their fingers or that they flick pins or they click pins that drive people nuts sometimes. But what do we need to replace that with so they're still getting that sensory, they're still getting that feeling? It's not that you want to take it away. You just want to put a format around it, okay? Know your response and what it is reinforcing to the student. Know that your student also can react to you, and that's really important. What is your body language telling them? Are you using verbal and nonverbal communication? So if you have a student that's got a really big outburst, right, whether it's online or whether you're in the classroom, the more verbiage that you use or language, the more it usually escalates the student. The more quiet and less verbiage typically de-escalates the situation, okay? Do you know your own triggers? For me, like I was telling you, it used to be spitting. I hated to be spit on. When I got spit, you better believe that kid got reinforced by my body language, right? That kid knew that they were pushing a button, right? Do you have biases? What is your comfort zone in working with behaviors? What is your fear? You really have to know what you fear when you're working with different kinds of behaviors. And it may be that it's a fear of being online and having a behavior in your virtual classroom. What does that look like? Do you know when to ask another staff to take over? That's the other thing. It doesn't always have to be you. If you have multiple people, I saw with my own son, they were on virtual and there were a couple of behaviors in his virtual classroom. The EA started working with that student and then the teacher kept teaching the lesson. They were able to use multiple classrooms. And so they put them in a classroom and started working with those particular students. So again, there's different ways you can do it even online. Do you know the tools to use? Can you give direction to the wanted behavior instead of statements like, no, stop, don't do that, get down, don't click that is a big one now that we're in the virtual room. Please don't do that in your screenshot, you know, all of those kind of things. Redirect instead of those kind of comments. Can you maintain instructional control by redirecting? Always the way you want to go is try to redirect and tell them exactly what you want. So we're going to go through just this section really quickly about how data supports planning and whether, no matter if you're a counselor or if you're working as a PE teacher, educator, if you're working as a teacher, we'll kind of go through this and talk. So data supports, it tells us what skills the student has and what skills they need to master. It also looks at patterns. And again, you guys, it can be really simple data. It may be just a piece of paper you're writing down when a certain person has a behavior or they don't. When they are redirected and they do it every time, you want to also be able to do that as well. And then also shows us the environment where a student can or cannot generalize acquired skills. Once data is collected, where do we go from there? What do we do? Allows for changes to the student's programs using documented data. Data just gives us a factual picture of what's happening. It looks at the accomplishments of that student. It allows you to look at the strengths and then where they're struggling. Data gives a clear picture of development, where that student is, because it might be a developmental issue. Goal progress, you might have to change some of the goals if they're not the right goals for where that student is. Skills learned and needed in real time. The other thing, data gives information that tells us the past, present, and the future of that desired skill you're wanting to teach them. Sometimes the questions to ask is, what type of data are you trained in? What does your district use? What is the data going to be used for, and how often will data be collected? Those are just questions you want to ask yourself if you're taking data. How quickly do you give positive reinforcement when you're working with behavior is one of the things we always want to make sure. Some students can wait and make sure that they can hold out for a couple days before you give that positive reinforcement back. Some people have stores virtually or stores and physical on campus. And so what happens is they collect tokens or stickers or so forth. Then they can buy something in the virtual store, or they can buy it in the physical store at school. And so what happens is they can save for 2 or 3 days and earn these tokens, and then go buy something. You may not have students that can wait that long. You may have to start out with really reinforcing every day or every virtual, whatever that looks like for that particular student, okay? Is the instruction format set up to give praise regularly for the wanted behavior? So I'm going to give you guys a tip. Once you learn this and practice it and just kind of go through some of these behaviors and you kind of learn how to do it better, what's scary is your home life may have this experience. My husband has to go through this sometimes. He asks me to do something and I'm like, sure, I'll do it. First, can you do this for me? And then I'll do that. I start to notice that I know how to do it at home really well. And so sometimes he'll be like, are you using some technique on me? And he'll like bring it up and talk about it. And I'm like, no, not at all. So just be aware that once you start using this, it becomes second nature. You just do it without thinking about it. And so it doesn't take much time away from you giving instruction. It just starts to happen in your normal process of teaching instruction, okay? Do all staff respond to the behavior with the same strategies? One of the things you have to think about is if you respond a certain way to a behavior, and your EA responds a certain way to the behavior, and the parents respond a certain way to behavior, and it's all within the same time frame, that student is not getting the reinforcement consistently. So you don't exactly know which reinforcement is going to be best, okay? So one of the things you want to make sure is that all staff you're working with know how to respond to that behavior in the same way, so you can see in fidelity what works and what isn't. Same thing for motivators, to see what works and doesn't. Do all staff working with the student know the function of the behavior? That's really important, because if you can figure out what that student is communicating and what the function is, what are they trying to get across, then you all can be working from the same page. Communication among school staff is really important. That's what we hear from you as a staff is probably the most frustrating part, is sometimes staff respond a certain way and another staff member responds this way, but this staff member over here knows it works and knows a certain motivator that works and how to reinforce, but this staff member may not believe in that or may not be able to do it. So in this classroom, this kid is doing great, and this one, the data shows they're not doing so great. So that's something to work on and make sure that school staff is on the same page. Okay. Questions to think about is, does a student not have behaviors in a certain setting? You always want to ask that question. If a parent comes to you and says, hey, I know virtually we're seeing this behavior, but at home, I never see this behavior, right? So then ask the parent, tell me about that. Tell me what you do, what motivates that student, and get that information and then see if it'll work in your setting, if it's possible. What is working well for the student in academic settings? You always, for kids with behavioral needs, they hear a lot of what they're not doing well or what they shouldn't be doing. They don't hear the positive parts. You've got to fill it with strengths as well as what they need to work on in redirection. You want them to know that they're good at things. You want them to know, because again, you're the giver of all good, right? So if you're the giver of good, you have to say the good. You have to talk about what that student is really good at and really diverse at. So you just want to make sure that that comes across to them as well. Does the staff that works with the student know there's an FBA or BIP? So this is a big one when I go into the schools that I find out, or even virtually we have found this out, that maybe the speech therapist knows that there's a FBA or functional behavioral assessment or behavior intervention plan, but then the other staff didn't know it. So that's not real helpful if you don't know that piece, right? So again, just make sure you kind of go through that. Remember that each teacher, student, and family is unique in their learning processing. We are no different as a teacher, me as a licensed clinical social worker, you as a counselor, so forth. We all need certain things, and we're all unique how we're made in our experiences. So we've got to look at that, how we process, how we interact with our environment, and then we have to kind of put a picture together with that and then work with one another. So when we're creating balance in our work, one of the things is all the things that we're kind of going through and talking about today is if you evaluate what we've discussed, that's the start of creating the balance. Is what do you need? What do you have available to you? What is your comfort zone? What is your learning and teaching process? What does your instructional control look like? One of the big things is whether you're virtually or whether you're in person in class, in a classroom setting, what do you need to be able to give that special instruction or that instruction to students? Because we all need certain things, right? Then it's implementing what works for you in your daily. So everything we've talked about today is, and I know it's a short 90-minute, time, so you can only give so much information, but it's talking about what implement and what really works for you and evaluating that before you come back to the table and really talk about that piece, okay? One of the other things is making time for yourself is crucial. And we all talk about that and people say, yes, Becca, that's a great idea. I would love to go read for 10 minutes, or I would love to take a walk, or but I don't have time. So one of the things is you are the one who decides for you. Some things that may relax somebody else and help them get a reboot or restart might be stressful to another person. So there's not a right or wrong fit to this. It's really you deciding what's good for you. For me, taking a walk with my children and then separate walk with just me is really important because I see their world through their eyes when we take a walk, and that calms me as a mom, which I need. I need to have that time with my kids, but I also need to have quiet time where I don't have voices in my head constantly, right? And I'm talking about real voices, but my kids chit-chatting and talking, right? So you really want to make sure that you have what makes you feel good. But before I present, I cannot be doing something really high stress that 2 minutes before I start. I need about 2 or 3 minutes to just sit in front of my computer, take a couple of breaths, and then I start to present. If you need shorter times of your presentation times when you're teaching and going through it, maybe you're doing 30 minutes and then you're doing another lesson on this, and then you come back and visit this. Whatever it is that you need as a teacher, just think about that. If you need some video time because you need visual given to them while you're talking auditory, and that's how your classroom and what you believe in, different modalities, then you're going to do that in your classroom as well. But no matter what, making time for yourself is really important about how your whole day goes. You will be the decider of how much time that is and what that is included in, okay? During COVID, it's learning that the new normal may be the unpredictable. And that's something that you may be teaching your students as well. You may be talking about COVID time. It's learning the new norm, that we don't have all the answers. We don't know what 3 weeks of data will look like now. When the governor's coming on and giving us new data and talking about that, she says they're taking 2 or 3 weeks of data, right? So we may be with new health orders that we didn't have 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. But the norm is that things are being flexible and that things are changing. My children have special needs, and I have 2 that have autism. They love their schedules. They love to know what's happening. What we've had to do is tell them we're going to revisit this on Fridays. After Governor talks, we're going to talk about creating a new schedule on Fridays and talking about after she comes out on Thursdays, this may be the new things. They know that now has become a part of their regular schedule. So even though it's not the norm, it can become the new norm. Kids, as you know, and students are pretty pliable, and they really will work. They're going to look to you as the adult of how you're modeling that. If you typically are stressed and everything seems chaotic online, there's a lot going on and so forth, they're going to respond to that chaos. If you have a pretty good demeanor and so forth, then they're going to respond to that calmness. If you set up your classroom to say, write down what you want to say and I will come around to you, we'll do a red robin or so forth, that's what your classroom's expectation is going to be. So as you set up your expectations, just like you would for your classroom, you're going to do your rules virtually. Probably the first meeting that you have with students, it's really good to set the ground rules for your particular virtual classroom, for your particular style, and how you classroom manage is really important. So just think about that before you go in, and then put those ideas into that, and then you can be able to look at that, okay? As you model the techniques and skills talked about today, the students will visualize and practice those skills. One of the great things we know is as you model, kids will typically, or students will typically repeat what they see, correct? Good or bad, right? So as you use your skills and your techniques, they're going to start modeling that and you're going to start seeing that, even if you're in physical classroom or if you're in the virtual classroom. If you start to talk about kids lining up and going to a cafeteria, they learn that really, really young, right? And then they learn how to do that etiquette of going to the cafeteria and so forth because they've seen it, they've heard it, they modeled it. Their teacher walks in front of them. They know how to walk behind that teacher and where they're going. It's the same thing. It's acquisition of skills. That's how we do it. And that's what's so exciting about it. So don't think there's just a right and wrong. Kids kind of have that osmosis part that they're really going to be watching you and so forth. And one thing that I want you to really take away from this, if you take nothing else away from today, this piece I really want you to hear, is that you have your role, you have your experiences, and you have your skills. So because of those, it doesn't change if we're in COVID time or we're in just traditional classroom teaching, is that your skills and who you are and how you teach and how you have your instructional control, how you're a counselor, how you're doing your PE, your physical education, no matter what role you have in the school, you still have that. That's still in you, and you still teach a certain way, and you still give that of yourself to your students. That's not going to change virtual and classroom. And we've heard from students over and over, they were so happy to see their teacher. They were so glad to do this science project, or they were so glad to do this or that. It gave them a sense of normacy because they're used to seeing their teachers, right? And so when you go away, don't think so much about, am I doing this right or wrong? Just think about the things that you need in order to do it. And then think about those skills that you've acquired and that you have and the techniques and how you share that going forward. Okay? So that's one of the things I wanted to take away as well. I wanted to give you some pictures of my kiddos when they were younger and talk about this for a quick sec. If you look down at the bottom right where my son is wearing a fire hat when he was younger, my son, they had found could go on field trips, could get access to go out to the community, so forth. What they didn't realize is when they took the hats away, he could not do those things. So a teacher walked in one day and said, put a hat on him and let's see if he can walk here or do this. And yes, he could. He could listen. He could follow directions. He could focus much more. So this was him when they designed a program. They were going to a fire station that day, and he has autism and some other things, and the sounds and everything. They figured out how to do quiet waves with the firemen. So they adapted his environment a little bit. And then they told him he's going to need a hat. And they, instead of saying, well, bring one from school, the firemen said, oh, we've got plenty of those around. So we will give him one when he gets here, and then he can wear it through the thing. So the teacher set up with him, if you're able to get on the bus, if you're able to sit while we ride over there, and if she set up these 2 or 3 things, then when you get there, you're going to get a hat. Really simple, right? And so when he got off the bus, he was able to sit there. He was able not to have echolale or yell completely during the time, some just because of his disability, but not because of a behavioral time. Then he was able to wait his turn safely to get off the bus. And then guess who was waiting for him? It was a fireman to give him a hat. So now you can imagine in the virtual world, what do you do with that? Because he's still very into something tangible. Now, granted, a lot has been phased out, so he doesn't need it as much, but he still needs things. His teacher has hats for him across and has different stickers and different things for the other students. So if he does A, B, and C of what she sets up, he gets to pick that and then put it on a virtual board in the classroom. So she just adapted what is done physically for him into the virtual world. Now to him, it's no different if he can physically put it on or he earns it, and he shows me all the different hats he learned by doing his lesson that day. So just think about how you can adapt and what you need. Now, granted, his teacher called me and his teacher said, can you help me figure out a virtual format where I can do what I'm thinking? And so that's a part of it too. Don't feel like you're alone. You have IT people at your schools. You have a wealth of information and resources. If you need something from us or from, the SHEI, so forth, we can get those and make sure that you can use some of those resources, but just be able to do that. The other thing is here, he loves to put things together in the middle, where you see him playing at the table at the top right under questions. He loves to put things together. That's a big deal. So what the teacher did, he does adaptive PE. For those of you that are PE instructors, you'll understand. But he has adaptive PE, and what they do is they help me figure out as mom what things he needs to put together while the teacher's doing a lesson, okay? So they actually are he's playing and having movement, and he's paying attention, and he's able to give that feedback. So again, it works really well because his hands are busy. His hands are busy. He's able to build and do that, and he's getting reinforced because as long as he doesn't have a behavior and he's able to set, he can have that. If he has a behavior in that moment, then, oh, we have to try again in 10 minutes. We have to take it, and he knows that he earns it or takes it away. It's not the teacher doing it. And that's the great thing about the behaviors, either virtually or in class, is that they either earn it or they don't. It's not a punitive process at all. And he knows now, he'll even tell you, I earn it. And then he'll tell you if it gets taken away, oh, I'm not earning right now. And then he'll go on and figure out how to do it, okay? One of the other things, if you'll look at the top picture, and it's in the left-hand corner with him hugging the dog, that is also a virtual thing that she has done with all the kids in the classroom. If they have pets that they truly love and that they're close to, she has what's called pet time. And so this has worked for some of the junior high kids and some of the elementary kids in particular. They can go and show their dogs, and they have a time that they can show their pets in class. That's their reinforcement time. First, we will do this and this, then you can show us your animal that you have at home. That may be something simple to do for a teacher. The other thing is if you're doing physical activity, which he loves, the PE coach comes on at the time that the teacher is on as well, and they do sections of PE time within their lessons. So if they're doing science and there's something where they have to move and build something or pour something or watch a video, what have you, they do like a 5-minute where they do yoga or they do something, and then they're able to do that particular lesson. So that's also a tip that you can do. Some of it's been interesting because he's a twin, he's a fraternal twin. So something that his teachers use, and I've seen other teachers talk about this with me, is that they're using siblings at home too that are already in the screen, that are already come running behind them and doing things. They're like, hey, who's that? And they'll stop for a minute, let them introduce their sibling, and the sibling says hi or whatever, then they move off, and then they start teaching. So if you have things that are spontaneous, that are not planned in your virtual meetings, sometimes if it's ethical and it's able to be in a school setting or a virtual setting in this case, you can go with that. You can use that as your strength. So sometimes Max, that's one of my son's names, will be able to work and do something, and he'll say, I want my brother, because he's running behind him at a certain time, no matter how we try as parents, right? We have siblings at home. And she'll say, you know what, let's finish this, and then let's say hi to your brother. Easy reinforcement. He's still learning that teacher's the giver of good. That teacher is designating when they can do it and when they can't. PE, the same way. So that's kind of what you want to look at and kind of go into. Okay. So if you're in a virtual classroom, there are tools that you can use that you can download on your screen. And like when you share your screen, they can show stickers, even if you're sharing your screen, or in some formats, they're built into it. And you can download your own stickers and so forth. The student, you can click on them in talking to the teacher, and the teacher clicks on that sticker that they earn. One teacher, for example, she said she's not real tech savvy. So what we had her do that she felt comfortable with, she would take the stickers for the student and just drag them or copy and paste them on a Word document. And each student in her class had a Word document with cut and paste stickers on it, and that was their page. And so what she would do was when she screen shared, she'd bring up that page for that student. That's a real easy way to do it, that if you don't like clicking a lot as you're going or interactive virtual, that's a way you can do it. You can always cut and paste something in a Word document and then just screen share it, whatever that is that's motivating for that student. If you are a really techie person, there, when you get into Google, you can even Google reinforcement stickers or virtual stickers or any of those kind of things. And what you can do is those stickers will be wherever you place them. And if you click on them, sometimes the stickers dance or they move side to side and the student can see that. And you click on it and then that's their sticker. And you can actually drop it into their picture that's off to the side. Like it might be like right here in my corner, the same as raising your hand, you know, virtually, and give them that. There's some motivation for, you know, the reactions that you have in Zoom where they have the clapping and they have the hand waving and so forth. There's ones that you can use. And what happens is she'll allow in her classroom, she'll say, okay, you did such a good job explaining that. We want to give you a hand clap. And then all the other students get to do a hand clap for them. And that student gets to visually see it and then hear the teacher say it. So you could do it really simple, or you can do it more complicated. One teacher was showing me that there are downloads on her iPhone that are apps that are free that have games where stickers, or you can make trophies that you can put their name on, like virtually, and different things. And then she screen shares that as well. So if you want more information in that, if you will put in the chat, if you're comfortable with it, if you want to put your email in that, we can get your emails and we can give you some more resources that we've seen that other teachers have told us about, if you would like more information about that.
And speaking of more information, someone is asking, do you have data or information on working with older school students, like middle school?
We do. We have some stuff with special education as well when you're working with students in middle school. And then we also, one of the things that you want to look at when you're working with middle school is you're working on a lot of functionality in middle school, right? You're getting them ready for high school. You're doing a lot of functionality with how they do. Some of the teachers have said what they're doing in reinforcement, they're having their middle schoolers choose a topic, do some research on it, and then they're starting to present. And they're starting to take like maybe 2 minutes of the classroom time, and they're able to show what they're sharing. They're using reinforcement to let them have time virtually to kind of be a leader in the group or so forth. You're the expert. You know where your kids are developmentally. So if you had somebody that could do that or you could help them, that can be a really good tool. The other thing is sometimes somebody can go around and talk and summarize what another student said or what they heard them saying, and then they can interact. One teacher told me that there is, and I may say this wrong, so please give me grace in this, baccalaureate education or IB schools that have that curriculum. There's a lot of presenting or kinetic learning in it. So one teacher got on their websites that are you know, you Google this, and a lot of them gave them techniques for middle school and high school, things that are virtual and things that are helpful and reinforcing for them. And they're using some of those techniques as well. I think in Albuquerque, for example, like Sandia and some of the other ones have that curriculum. And so sometimes they're taking some pieces of the reinforcement and working that in the middle school as well. The other piece of it is science has been a really big one that some of the teachers have talked about, that if the student finds, they send in a video to the teacher before the virtual classroom begins, and that student is to find something that shows the science piece of that. And so they send in that video to the teacher, and if the teacher approves it, then that student presents it. As a high school student or as a junior high student, they present that YouTube video. The teacher, of course, is in charge of screen sharing. So the student, you have complete safety when you can stop it and start it, but the student has found it, and then they talk about it. Same thing with talking about history events. Somebody was setting up rules for COVID for hand washing, even while they're virtual. They would set a break and say, okay, everybody go wash their hands, 20 seconds. And so what they would do is they had this page that she created that gave a visual in it, and she would rotate the students giving the directions. Then she would say, wow, that was a great way to explain that. I didn't think of explaining it that way. And she would build that rapport. And again, the giver of good, they would go off, wash their hands, and then whoever got back after 30 seconds, because 20 seconds hand washing, right, would come back, they would get a reinforcement because they were the first one back to the camera, those kind of things. Some of the teachers also are working with families and giving them reinforcement. If they're sitting with their student, and they, especially if you're in special education or what have you, if you're sitting with your student and you're helping them negotiate, The family's very much getting, thank you for helping me today in my classroom. You know, thank you, just like you would if a parent volunteers and gets the approval to come into your classroom and help you, you do it virtually as well. Because you're not only building rapport with the students, you're building rapport with the family as well, because the family's there online for you. And sometimes some of the teachers have given us the feedback that that's how they got some of the parents to participate that maybe were not participating when they were actively in school, like that might not be coming as readily or so forth. So that's one of the things as well. Another teacher reinforced working parents and just said, I know how hard it is that you're working from home, for those that you're working at home, and I just want to give kudos to you. So they did a lesson about what your parents have been supporting and helping kids at home with. And they did like YouTube videos of funny things parents have been doing with their kids and whatever. And she made about a 20-minute little video for them saying, thank you for helping me as a teacher. So whatever it is, whatever you feel comfortable doing, that's where you want to be with it. Don't feel like you have to go completely out of your comfort zone. Don't feel like if you're not real techie, you can do really simple things and it's just as appreciated. If you are a person who really loves virtual and so forth, you could do that as well. Okay, other questions, Leah?
Oh, there's a question. Yes, ma'am. Do you have any resources for adaptive physical education? Also, people are wanting to know about high school, anything you have about high school, because you know, it's hard to find stuff about high school. When I taught high school, that was extremely difficult.
Right. So the techniques we talked about today work for all ages. So that's one thing to remember. Your motivators are going to be different, okay? Obviously, because where your child is developmentally and where they're changing, it's going to be different. One teacher told me that her classroom is very into cars. She has mostly boys, and this was back in the spring, okay? She said, I have a lot of boys, and they're very into cars right now. So what she did is she started teaching lessons, and then they would talk about the building of a car. She had some students who were actually putting cars together with their family and so forth. So they would show snapshots of that, and then they would talk about the dynamics of the car in the science part of the lesson. So it's going to work the same for the ages. The motivators will be different. And that's what you have to think about, how you want to reward or reinforce that student. If a student, again, it really loves to teach or really loves to do a section, that may be an opportunity again to be able to do. One student does, and I'm not great at this, so forgive me, those of you who are really into this, draws pictures, and when you move the pictures, it makes a whole film for them. Like when you move the pages, it moves the person on the screen that they've drawn, right? So this individual loved drawing and loved doing that in high school. And so there were certain kids that were really good at art, so they decided to do that as well. And that was the reinforcement, is to have a section of that and be able to have that in the classroom. So it really is the same tools and techniques. It's changing your reinforcer to what you know about your students and what they're into. The great thing about virtual is there's almost anything out there with YouTube. Yes, of course, we have to be safe and so forth. But if you as a teacher are finding it, you'll know what's reputable and so forth. And then you are in control of that when you screen share, if there's certain videos that they like to watch. Science in high school and mathematics was a really big thing. Teachers told me that they Googled a lot about really good videos that showed what they were teaching. And so they were able to visually see it and auditory. The feedback from students that I received was that they really liked the visual and auditory, and then being able to regurgitate the information back and be able to have that. The other thing with the junior high group in particular, office hours were really, really crucial for the students. They said sometimes they didn't want to ask because of the culture of middle school and where they are developmentally. You could, when they explained it to me, they're like, I didn't want to ask in front of my friends. I didn't get how to do the assignment, or I didn't get how to do that. So that's one technique, that having office hours or having multiple times they can come to you and talk to you about how to do it. To be able to have that is really important, especially for middle school when they're trying to fit in with their peers. The other piece for middle school and high school that's really, really crucial is that communication piece and that social skills piece. So if you can build in a social time within your lessons, it's really important. So they can talk about what's kind of going on. They can communicate with each other. Now, granted, it's facilitated. You want to make sure you as a teacher are there to facilitate it. But again, to have that social time to really interact with each other was something that was important to them, because some of our kids that are home, whether junior high school, are not getting out into the world virtually. Just because they're doing virtual online doesn't mean that they're having those interactions. So sometimes that was the reward in itself, is having a social time. So that's another technique for junior high and high school.
Somebody said you mentioned a source that had plans for high school earlier. Special school approach? Question mark.
So several of the teachers had told me international baccalaureate or IB schools. It's a certain way to teach. And so, of course, they're not taking the curriculum from there, but they're taking the techniques of kinetic learning, of how to present, those kind of things. It's very heavy in that. So in baccalaureate, it's called IB, and if you Google it, what happens in it, it gives you different ideas of how to present for the different ages, and that's really important as well. So that's one thing that you can go to and look at. The other thing is that if you, like I did teacher learning, I did the best way to teach science to a 9th grader. Best way to do that. There's a lot of free now that are reputable that usually charge you for getting in. Now during COVID time, they're not charging you. They're letting you kind of look by ages and so forth. And then you can start looking at what you think is ethical and right for your classroom. It's not changing the curriculum or that your district is approved, but it's techniques of how to teach what you're teaching. And that's what you want to look for, is just the techniques, the different styles of teaching. There's some, I'm not endorsing, I can't endorse in my role or anything like that, but I'll tell you as a parent, something that I found that the teacher and I used was study.com. There was, you look at that and they also give you ideas. And then study.com, other things were popping up because I was looking at, they have like preparation for teachers. They have there's a thing on there that they discuss like top 10 things you need to teach virtually. And it's just for you to think about. And a lot of it goes with the therapeutic of what we've talked about today, what I know as an LCSW, and then what we know as, kind of how developmentally kids learn. So that's a piece of it as well. There were some teachers that wanted information about how do I have conversations with families? Like how do I, in this norm, they want to know the answers. And what teachers have told me is that they've gotten great grace from families when they've just been honest about what they do know and what they don't know. Some of the families, the websites of the districts, sometimes it's a little much because you know how much information is up there and so forth. They've broken down those websites for them. They've done a lesson within, like, especially for high school or for junior high, when the kids are able to follow and track and so forth really well. They are good developmental days, right? And so what they do is they put sections on there and they talk about it and they help the family understand where the district is planning and kind of looking at the factual information. So that's really helpful too. Just because it's presented, just because governor's announcing, doesn't mean that all of our families understand how to apply it. So the teachers are helping with the application piece of what it looks like for their students. Transitioning, really talking and telling families. I will tell you the most calming thing the teachers did for me, and I'm sure there's tons of you that are parents that had this experience. The teacher said, no worries. There's not a right or wrong to this. We will transition you and we will help him get used to whatever environment we're doing. It doesn't have to happen in one meeting or two meetings. We've got time. And so we can help and we can do this. Even though we feel kind of stressed and things are different, we will break it down in steps and we will go through it. And that was the most comforting thing, to say that that's what the teacher needed as well as us. And so she said, as much as I need grace for you guys as parents being home working, she's like, I need you to understand, I have kids, I'm working and I'm doing it virtual. So there was just a mutual respect with one another that was really helpful and calming. So just being honest about what you know and then being honest about what you don't know. Sometimes your district is making decisions and you don't know as a teacher what that's going to pan out or look like in the final fidelity of it. Okay. And guys, I just want to thank you so much for attending. I know that you guys have choices and different, sessions and things you want to go to. So I just appreciate you sharing this time with me.